What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of All Out War. I'm Turner, and I'm in the studio with Rosie. What up, Rosie?
Hey, what's up?
How you doing?
I'm doing well.
This is episode number 119, for those that are keeping count.
That's one less than 120 and one more than 118.
Yes, it is. Sandwiched right in the middle. So what's up, man? What do you know?
Hey, did you know that in 2011, there was an earthquake off the coast of Japan that was so powerful, it measured almost 9.0 on the Richter scale.
Wow.
And it moved Japan 8 feet closer to North America. It shifted the planet on its axis.
What?
And it caused the length of a day to be shortened by almost 1.8 microseconds.
Wow.
Yeah.
Dude, that's amazing.
Isn't it?
That's amazing. It moved the entire island of Japan. 8 feet.
Close.
8 feet, though.
Yeah.
Think about what that must have done. And, dude, we've hit them with a nuclear bomb, and it didn't even do that.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Are they on a big fault or something?
I don't know. Just a big, I guess so, man. I don't know. I don't know how the planet works. I don't believe it.
You don't believe in the planet?
It's flat, man.
It's flat.
Yeah. Well, we're definitely not talking about that.
No, we're definitely not talking about flat Earth.
We're definitely not talking about conspiracies.
Well, if it's flat Earth, how do we have down under? How do we have that? Didn't think about that one, did you?
No, I didn't.
I just blew your whole conspiracy out of the water.
It's not a conspiracy. It's what the Bible says, dude.
You're right, though. We have a great podcast episode on this one. It's something that I think a lot of people are a little bit some of our listeners know a lot about, and a lot of our listeners don't know anything about. And I think it's really important. And it's touching on the subject of Australia and what's happening down there in light of everything with the pandemic and their government and the tyranny that is taking root and bearing fruit, unfortunately, in that nation.
Yeah.
So we have a great episode on that. And
well, hey, since you said the fruit and the
root,
and the boot and the toot, I was going to say, the blood, the tree of liberty needs to be watered.
Yes.
With the blood of tyrants.
I agree.
Every once in a while.
From time to time.
From time to time.
That's right. Who said that quote? Do you remember?
I think it was Thomas Jefferson.
Was it TJ?
I think so.
Yeah, it might have been.
I believe so.
It was probably one of those old grizzly guys that deserved, you know.
Yeah. Dude, he wore a wig.
He
wore a white, he wore one of those wigs.
Hey, man, I want you to understand that most of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, once they signed that Declaration of Independence, most of them died penniless and in destitution because they were outcast and really, really treated horribly.
Yeah.
You know,
also George Washington's wife was a dude.
That's a whole nother episode.
Look at it. Tell me that's not a dude.
No, I know. I agree. I think.
Look at the vertebrae.
Does Martha have an Adam's apple?
Yes, she does. Yes, he does. It's Mark.
Mark.
George and Mark Washington.
Oh, jeez. What if we found out? What if that was the case?
It is true.
And the trans community would be up and they would be like, we're vindicated.
Mm-hmm.
Or I don't know, we're vindicated. Maybe more like that, right?
No, it'd be a woman. It'd be like, we're vindicated.
We're vindicated.
It's ma'am.
It's ma'am.
Anyways.
All right, well, sit back, grab a coffee, and enjoy.
You're listening to the All Out War podcast.
Well, hello, everybody. We have a wonderful guest on the podcast this time, and she's coming to us all the way from down under, from Australia. I want to welcome to the podcast Evelyn Rae. Evelyn, how are you? Hello?
Yeah, good, thank you. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, it's awesome. So let me just give the viewer or the listener a little bit of background here. I've came across you on Twitter, and you work for Caldron Pool, and you do awesome writing for the Caldron Pool. It's a Christian conservative sort of digital newspaper or news site. And so I started interacting with you, and I was getting information from you that I wasn't able to find anywhere here in the United States about what's going on in Australia. So I decided to ask if you'd want to come on and join us. And so we'd love for you to share a little bit about what's going on in Australia today, and what do you see happening? Maybe what do you see going on in the future? And really, like, how did you guys end up in that spot that you're in right now?
Yeah, that's a very full question with many ways I could go with this. But I think quite simply, the current state of Australia where I'm living is very much a two-tiered society. We have those of us who are unvaccinated still locked in our homes, and those who are vaccinated, the government has allowed small little breadcrumbs of freedom to kind of let them back into society. And, you know, as you said, I write for Caldron Pool, a Christian conservative, news outlet. And, you know, we've been kind of saying from the very beginning, you know, what's been going on. We've been trying to shout it almost from the rooftops. But unfortunately, not many people really want to listen. And our own country, our own media don't really want to report on what's going on. They're more interested in reporting the narrative as opposed to the truth and the facts. And I think that's translating into how it's being presented overseas as well. Like you mentioned, you know, you haven't really been able to get a good grasp of what's going on, but a lot of people who do sort of want to know what's happening in Australia, the first question they ask me is that really happening? Is that real? Because it's such disbelief, just the current state of affairs that we have over here. And, you know, sadly, I have to always answer, yep, it's real. And people are just blown away by that. But, you know, I think the reason that we're here isn't an Australian-only issue. I think it's a Western issue, Western nation issue. I think it's actually a corrosive rot that is plaguing our once great nations collectively across the West. I think the difference with Australia is the culture over here. We very much have gone back to our convict roots. It's like we've gone from penal colony to penal colony in under 200 years. I mean, surely that's a record. But whether I think Americans are far more God-fearing, even if people aren't actually saved in their hearts. They're grown up with this patriotic, God-fearing, you know, God first and then man under God. Whereas Australia, we very much have rejected Christ over here. We've kind of, he's like in the corner somewhere in the shadows, and he's not someone that we fear. And I think in turn, we've placed the government here as Lord. We've placed the government here as the protector. And with that comes a culture of security over freedom. And I think that's the difference with Australia. I think the root issue with the culture is infecting all of the Western nations. These ideologies, these relativist, subjectivist ideologies are everywhere. You can't escape them in the West. But Australia is a little bit more, I guess, further along the road because of our security over freedom sort of culture, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing that I always hear immediately when I bring up Australia and people don't know what's going on, I'm like, oh, you don't know? And I just share. And they go, well, yeah, didn't they give up their guns like 25, 30 years ago? And I'm like, I think so, yeah. and they always say, well, that's a big problem. But, I mean, and I get that, you know, obviously, you know, that's going to, if you can't defend yourself, they're going to be taken advantage of. But don't you think that that there is some sense of things have changed so dramatically, but we weren't wanting this? Is that like bubbling up anywhere in the culture, or is it just mainly conservatives or those people that are, you know, not interested in getting the vaccination?
Yeah, I think so. For a very long time, I was always saying, like, at what point is the rubber band going to snap? Because the Australian people are being stretched to such lengths. It's like, where is it? Where is, like, how far can we be stretched as people? And, you know, us conservatives and Christians and libertarians, you know, that spectrum of, I guess, politics have been very much awake to what's going on, but we've been just hitting our heads against a brick wall at the vast majority of Australians who either are complicit or who actually agree with it, or who just are putting their head in the sand because if it doesn't affect them as the individual, they just don't have the conviction to do something about it for their neighbour. And unfortunately, you know, I've been quite disappointed with the Australian sort of response to all of this. I mean, we have up to 5,000 phone calls a day to the police of people dobbing, snitching on people that they're seeing within their communities or their neighbours. 5,000 a day in one state alone. That's not even the country. And police are having to respond to, you know, a neighbour saying, oh, I saw a car drive into the driveway of this person's house that normally isn't there. And the police are having to come and say, are you out of your area? Are you leaving for an essential reason? Have you got a permit from New South Wales Health to say you're allowed to leave your home? Wow. And this is what police are dealing with. This is what Australians are dealing with. 5,000 snitches a day. So, you know, whilst there are increasingly, you know, growing in numbers with this conservative movement, the more that, and we're having so many people kind of wake from their sleeping sort of state, like it is happening, but we are still very much, those of us who are willing to lose our jobs, those of us who are willing to lose our friends, our family, those of us who are having to leave our churches because our ministers are falling for it. Like there's a lot of things happening for the good, but it's still on a very small minority, unfortunately.
Yeah. Can you share with us some of the rules that are in place right now? Because I don't think people know even how dramatic it truly is.
Yeah, so I'm in the state of New South Wales, which is the state where Sydney is, and each state is sort of different and varying. But in my experiences being in New South Wales, we're fairly similar to Victoria, so people can kind of get an idea of, I guess, the types of things. So I'm not allowed to leave within 5 kilometres of my residential address.
Wow.
So I can't leave unless it's for an essential reason, and the government deems what's essential. As an unvaccinated person, I can't go to the gym. I can't go to the swimming pool. Even if going to the swimming pool is for rehab or some sort of physiotherapy, I'm not allowed to go because I'm unvaccinated. As an unvaccinated person, I can't go to weddings or funerals unless they're under 10 people for each, which when does that ever happen?
Right.
I'm not allowed to go to retail stores. I can't do my shopping. The only shops that I'm allowed to go to is what's deemed as essential, which is my groceries. That is it. I can't go and buy a new pair of shoes. I can't go and get a jumper. Wow. I can't go and buy beauty products. I'm not allowed to go to the hairdresser. I can't go to the beauty salon. The only thing that I can do is leave my home for an essential purpose, which is getting food for my family. That's it. Anything outside of that, I can face thousands of dollars worth of fines and criminal charges. Wow. And if I speak out against what's going on, there's laws in place to say that I'm inciting a crime, and the crime is going against these public health orders and restrictions. So we've had people over here who have said to people, we shouldn't have to comply with all these restrictions. The police have actually locked them up and put them in jail. That's the most extreme what's happening here in Australia.
And so they're saying that they're doing all of this for the sake of safety for the virus?
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't even make sense to me. But why, like the big question that I come across is why are the police complying with this? Like, why wouldn't the police say no and not go along with it?
Yeah, this is a question I've been asking. I'm not sure if you were aware, but I served in the police as a detective over here for 12 years. Oh, wow, I only resigned in 2020. And so I've been faced with these questions. Like I bled with these people. I cried with them. I've had to go through so much, you know, with these people emotionally and spiritually. And I'm like, now they're against me. And it's been really hard for me to kind of swallow and to understand. But the only way I've been able to kind of rationalize what they're doing in my mind is the simple reason that they don't view us freedom-loving, Christ-fearing, unvaccinated heathens. They don't view us as people anymore. They view us as criminals. The only way that they can actually do what they're doing, unless they're a psychopath, the only way they can justify it is if they've changed that mental thing in their brain where they no longer think of us as a citizen and they think of us as a criminal. Because I joined the police to lock up criminals.
Right.
That is something that was in me, that I wanted to lock up the bad guys. And I spent 12 years doing that. And, you know, that's why I joined. And these people they're not bad people. They join because they want to lock up bad people as well. So they have to view us as that for them to be able to follow through with that. And the cops that don't view us as that, the cops that are actually standing against all of these restrictions, the police force is actually firing them and sacking them and driving them out of the police force. So and I've said this is another issue. I'm sure we could talk about this again, the issue of policing in Australia, but we're very much over here a quota over quality process with recruitment. And I think that they've deliberately recruited people for this purpose in the police for a very long time. People who can't necessarily think independently and analyze things, people who basically are bred and indoctrinated and educated and trained in a way to just follow orders. And as I said, I'm not saying they're evil people, but the police have very carefully selected who they're recruiting, because the people that they're recruiting they just think they're doing the right thing, and they don't have that critical mind to really kind of weigh it all up. So as I said, that's a huge issue that I could probably speak for 10 hours on. But I think that's what we're facing with the police right here. The police that are speaking out against it are losing their jobs. The police who are saying, I'm not going to enforce the mandates. Well, the police have actually now in New South Wales brought in a directive that police aren't allowed to use discretionary powers when it comes to infringements for COVID-related incidents. So if someone's breaching a restriction, normally if someone's doing something, you can use your discretion and say, weigh up the aggravating and mitigating factors and decide whether you actually arrest or infringe somebody. And you have that power as an officer, as an individual. But with COVID, they've done it. If you want to use your discretion and not fine somebody, you actually have to get and seek permission from the rank of an inspector or above, which is someone who's like the boss of a police station. So discretionary powers have been moved, and those who aren't following through this are then getting in trouble for not following directions from a senior officer, and then they're losing their jobs. So this is the situation over here. It's pretty bleak.
You know, I saw a video of a group of people. They were protesting. They were, I guess, I'm not sure where it was. It was in Australia, but I'm not sure what part of Australia. And this SUV pulls up and these guys jump out. They looked like they were wearing like this, like regular jeans, but tactical jackets, like vests. And they were absolutely manhandling the people who were completely peaceful. They were not, you know, it wasn't like America last summer where we were, you know, riots were peaceful protests were burning down cities. It was actually people that were just protesting the mandates, I guess. And they just were without any reserve, just jumped out and manhandled them. And they looked like they were military trained. They didn't, the way that they functioned and moved, they didn't look like they were like a typical police training, although a lot of police is really tactical now. But are you hearing anything about like outside people bringing from the outside in to work in the police and control the people?
Yeah, this is a really good question, because this is where a lot of confusion comes from. And you know what? I don't blame people from being confused, because we've been lied to for so long in Australia and around the world by our media, by everyone. Like, can you really blame people for getting these things wrong, or at least assuming that it's a possibility? But something that's really important, and something that I try, really hard to try and do, is report the truth, even if it doesn't suit what I want. And the truth is, they weren't private military. They are police. There is a special unit within the Victorian Police Force that's like our SWAT.
Okay.
That's like our, like your equivalent to that. And the interesting part is, and where people get confused is obviously like the reason that they were deployed for the protest. That particular unit, and from myself working in the police, I only call those people if there's a sniper, if there's a hostage, if there's a bomb threat. Like they are used for the most heinous and most tactical crime events that are, out there. And so the fact that the Victorian police utilise their unit for those things for these protests speaks volumes. And I think that people who don't understand the police and the different units were confused because they were in tactical gear, military type gear and weaponry, but they are actually just Victorian police. And another reason why there's a lot of confusion is because over here in Australia, we actually have in Victoria signed a bill to say that we can utilise the UN officers, in certain events. So we have the legislation there. And we're in a situation where there's so much distrust between the government and the police and the people that people were looking at that legislation and people were looking at this footage and people were going, oh my goodness, what's happening? This must be that, but it's not. We have everything in place that the scenario, like you mentioned, could potentially happen in the future, but it hasn't happened. And if you look at the public health orders in Australia, in order to enforce these public health orders, it has to be enforced by what's called an authorised officer. And if private military or UN or somebody was being used in Australia for the purpose of enforcing these orders, they would have to be listed in the public health orders as an authorised officer, and they're currently not. So that kind of, as I said, I don't blame people for thinking that this is possible because we've been lied to and completely destroyed our relationship with our government and our police. But in this particular video you're mentioning, it is actually just a special unit within the Victorian police that's more tactical, like your equivalent of SWAT in America.
Yeah.
But yeah, they manhandled them like they were kids, like they were dolls just throwing around. It was really sad to see that fracture between law enforcement and civilian, because we're a little bit different to America in that we've been able to trust majority of our police for our whole lives. We all drive around with stickers on our cars, cops are tops, and we grew up like this. And we've had a really good relationship with the police for such a long time, and right now in front of our eyes we're seeing this fracture. And unfortunately we will end up like America. We will end up with that distrust between cops and people, and we will end up in a really bad place if the police. I don't even know if it's too late already, to be honest. If I can give you my personal opinion here, working in law enforcement for as long as I did, I relied so much on the community to help me in my job, and I wouldn't blame the community right now for not wanting to help me if I was wearing a uniform because of everything that's done.
Right. Yeah. No, that was my big concern. Like my big question was, if as a law enforcement officer, why wouldn't you just step across the line and just say, no, I'm not doing this. This is tyrannical. I'm here to protect and serve, not to enforce, unjust tyranny and become an arm for some, government official that's too big for his britches, But what happens if, say, for instance, someone speaks out against the government or the people or a specific individual that's maybe in America we have Fauci, and in my house, we have a joke, where if you stub your toe, we're like, ouchie Fauci, and we joke around, and somebody gave my wife this gift, and it was sanitized wipes and hand sanitizer and a mask, and we were joking around, and I called it her Fauci pouchy, and because it's she still has, my wife, where she works, she still has to wear a mask every day, unfortunately. But we were laughing at I could go on Twitter right now and I could make the most crazy statement about Fauci and call him whatever I want. And there's a good chance that I might get, a little bit of a reprimand, a slap on the wrist, maybe a suspension for a couple of days. But can you even do anything like that right now down there? Is there anybody speaking out against the government officials and calling them out on these things, like the real science and those type of things?
Yeah, we have such severe censorship over here. Like, basically, everything that we sort of bring up, like the fact that in the last month we've had 800 and something heart problems in young adults, and it's like that coincides with us reaching 95% vaccination rate. And this is actual science. This is impartial. This isn't subjective. This isn't an opinion. This is a fact. There have been 800 and something admissions for myocarditis or whatever the condition is for your heart since the beginning of the month. And if you go back a year ago, we had maybe 20 cases. And we're sort of presenting these arguments like, can somebody look at these facts? Can somebody look at the science? Can somebody just impartially and objectively weigh this up? And yeah, we're censored. Our own health officials come on and give all these, press conferences saying the people who think that are idiots. And they actually call us these words on mainstream media.
Wow.
And they do. And if you look it up, you can look. His name's Brad Hazard. He has openly come on and said that anybody who's unvaccinated is a moron, is an idiot, and he uses this aggressive language to label us as all unvaxxers. And, I served my country. I had to be vaccinated to do that. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I'm very much pro-choice in this particular matter. And just like I'm asking people to respect my choice of not being vaccinated, I have to respect other people's choices if they want to be vaccinated. But what I do want is people to be vaccinated without coercion, without bullying, without fear of losing their job and their livelihood. And we're not really offered that over here. I mean, we call our premiers over here like Dictator Dan, which is a little bit like the Fauci slur you're saying. And, we say all these things, but the people who have actually seriously spoken out about what's going on, we've had our platforms shut down. I was on, a lot more mainstream news once upon a time, until I started speaking out against the mandates. Now I've been blacklisted from going on TV to give my opinion on certain matters. And, we've had some people in Australia get locked up in prison, like I mentioned, because they spoke out against the government, and then the government, the police have said they're inciting it. And there was a girl who was arrested for this because she said, we're going to go protest, there's civil disobedience, all these things. They said she was inciting a crime. And then when she got charged with the offence of incitement, they wanted to give her conditional bail, which she had to sign to say if she gets released, she's not allowed to speak up anymore about anything. If they release her until the court date on conditional bail, she has to shut down her social media platforms. She's not allowed to do that. And she refused. She's like, I'm not signing away my right to speak. Yeah. And so they held her for over a month in jail until the court matter. This completely young woman, innocent, never had a criminal history, not a drug dealer, not a pedophile, nothing. She literally spoke out against the government and refused to sign something to say that she would stop speaking out against what they're doing. And she spent a month in jail.
Wow.
So, yeah, at the moment, though, if I can speak encouragingly on something, because I don't want to be completely negative. It's hard not to be. Yeah. I'm by nature a bit of a pessimist, which is a sin that I'm really trying not to fall into that trap. And I think because of my history in law enforcement, I just think the worst of things. I'm very much glass half empty.
I'm with you there.
I'm trying so hard to be better at remembering the promises of God and not believing the lies of Satan, and remembering that in the end, we just laid at the foot of the cross and perfect justice will take place in one way or another. Yeah. But, if I am speaking positively, at the moment, in Australia, they've just tried to pass permanent pandemic legislation, which means at the moment we operate under what's called emergency powers.
Right.
And these emergency powers have expiry dates. So they have to apply for it through Parliament and the court. And they say for 3 months, we're going to have emergency powers because we're in an emergency. You know, we're in COVID pandemic. We have these emergency powers, but then there's like a checkpoint because every few months when it expires, it has to go back through this procedure and it has to continue to get rolled over. Now, the state of Victoria can't extend this state of emergency past December the 16th. So what the government has now done and said, because we're lawfully not allowed to extend it because it's been 300 and something days of it, which it's well and truly expired.
Wow.
They're putting in permanent legislation which gives them the power by law, enacted law, to draw on these restrictions and mandates whenever the state premier and the government decides it's necessary. And in the legislation, it stipulates that there doesn't need to be a pandemic for them to use these powers. It's if they foresee it happening. So you can see how this can be manipulated for climate change lockdowns.
Yeah.
You can see the potential
anything.
for it.
Yeah, anything.
And it's been really encouraging because finally that rubber band looks like it's going to snap because we had 100,000, 130,000 people take to Melbourne last weekend and protest this bill. And, you know, like we've been kind of screaming at an empty audience for such a long time. And finally seeing hundreds of thousands of people show up on the streets and say, this is the hill that I'm going to die on. This is too much. It's been good. And, you know, seeing that there were children in the crowds, and I love it. And I think the best part to come out of this in Australia and what the left, I don't like using left and right, but what people on the wrong side of history, what people, you know, on the wrong side of history don't realise is they've pushed children into hating the government and hating big government. And you see these little kids fighting for freedom, their God-given rights. And it's like, yes, the new generation of shepherds, the new generation of conservatives might be born from this, which, you know, is something good to take from it. And parents are pulling their kids out of school because they're now pushing vaccinations for 5 to 11-year-olds in Australia. Teenagers are already all vaccinated here in Australia. And, you know, parents are pulling their kids out of school and they're actually being parents and not using daycare as a surrogacy for parenthood, which is fantastic. Like, this is how it should be. And so there are good things that are going to come from all of this, I believe.
Was there any signs of this type of like tyranny like laying under before the pandemic? Like it seems so strange to me because, you know, Australia was like in a lot of ways as an American, when we looked at Australia, we looked at it a lot like America. Like, we know you didn't have the same constitution and all of that or the same electoral system and all of that. But it was very Western. It was very, you know, they were all like allies with us. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, the pandemic hits, and all of a sudden it's, you know, worse than even China in some ways. Like, was that showing itself at all before the pandemic?
To be honest, I think it was. Excuse me. I think, you know, for a really long time, excuse me, I'm so sorry. It's not COVID, I promise. For a really long time, we have basically in Australia asked the government to be mum and dad or God. And that's why they're treating us like children. And they've treated us like children for a really long time. You only have to look at our immunisation and our vaccination schedule to see that these things have been in place since like the 70s. Because if a child isn't vaccinated, or like the ones that they get when they're 6 months old and 12 months and 2 years and 4 years, if your child's not vaccinated, you're not eligible as a parent to get any assistance with your, like from the government, like Centrelink welfare from the government. If your child's not vaccinated, they can't go to schools and daycares. Like, there's limitations around where they can be educated and where they can be looked after and cared for if the parents are at work. So these things have been in place for a long time, but people in Australia have just accepted it.
Yeah.
And for a really long time have accepted you have to vaccinate your kids or they can't go to this school. You have to vaccinate your kids or you don't get assistance with, you know, parental benefits from welfare. Yeah. And that's been in place for decades, but people haven't really thought about it. And it's like, well, hang on. of course this is easy. We've had the pathway paved for us for a really long time.
Yeah.
And, you know, as I said also before, we're very much in Australia, we value security over our freedom. And like my parents' generation could buy houses for $20,000. Like, I mean, come on, they had no troubles in life.
Wow.
Like they could buy houses for $20,000. That was it. They had it easy. We call them the boomers.
Yeah.
And and they've just had it like so good that since their generation, our government here, and like all governments around the world, they grow. They don't have a tendency to get smaller. Governments get bigger with time by nature. And
that's right.
Our Australian government for decades has been chipping away at our constitution, at our God-given rights, and have put all these things in place to basically make each state of Australia autonomous. So whoever's in charge of that state has the power, even over the federal government.
Wow.
People don't seem to understand that our separation of powers over here isn't the same as like the federal and state powers, say, in America. Pretty much, our federal government doesn't really get involved with the state affairs. And that's why right now our health officers and our premiers are the most powerful people in the Southern Hemisphere, because they have the ability to do so, because the way our country's been formed and founded on has been built upon the government being the nanny state. The government being the security. Yeah, it's been like this since the beginning, and I think, it's only going to come back here unless foundationally something drastic changes in Australia.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say it's really interesting. Yeah, you finally give me a second to
go ahead,
ask a question,
please,
Turner.
Please do, Rosie.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I didn't know that about it, because it's weird. Like in the way that America is set up, like we have the federal government which oversees everything, which is really weird, because to have fully autonomous states that the federal government would actually respect the wishes of, that sounds like a really good thing for here. Like, I wish we had that here, because then kind of like what we're doing, like we're seeing in Texas, Florida's way better than Texas right now, but like you can go to Florida and not have to, Ron DeSantis, the governor of the head basically of Florida, Ron DeSantis, is just doing a really good job, because he's taking care of Florida and bringing all the people there.
But he's literally said, I'm not going to honor whatever Biden says. He's like, I'm not going to honor that.
Right. But
which is great.
Yeah. Except the whole problem is if Biden can always just bring the National Guard or, go to and do all these things. So it's really interesting, I guess, maybe since you guys kind of, Australia, we were saying is kind of a little bit further down the road of leftist or wrong side of history authoritarianism. So it almost is giving me some sort of pause, thinking that just really struck me. And on kind of a completely separate note, we had joked about beforehand, or I think so far we've said, the biggest thing that just keeps coming back in my mind is I lived overseas. I lived down in that kind of area. I'd never been to Australia, but that area of the world, and been to a lot of Western Europe, lived in Western Europe, and a lot of our allies and stuff like that. And the one thing that I always noticed about I grew up, had a lot of Australian friends and things like that, and they were very close to Americans. But the biggest thing that keeps coming back to me is we have the same ideas sort of liberty and freedom. We're very much the same. And I mean, I want to say, you guys have the outback, we have the middle of America. That's, we have the country guys and, the farmers and stuff like that. That other countries don't have. Australia and America are very unique brothers in this kind of way. But the only thing is, to harken back to this, is the fact that we do have guns and you guys don't? Because that's what the whole thing that I keep thinking of, and I don't know, like we were joking about it, with like Taiwan, and almost want to do it with Australia, like just go over and like airdrop guns into Australia.
Care packages.
That's right.
Yeah.
Like Call of Duty.
Exactly. Just drop them in and, say we got your back. But, I mean, that's kind of, I don't want to go off on this whole other tangent, but like the way that like the groundwork has been put in place, like you said, with all those things that, they're just waiting for the opportunity to turn them on and implement everything. That's why they were able to do it 300 days. That's a little more. Yeah. So that's
nearly a year. Yeah.
Yeah. Right away. Like immediately everything was in place. The infrastructure was in place. They were able to shut down everything. Like what you had talked about with the police, just hiring practices, which takes years. They can't just all of a sudden, start having all classes, like start only hiring idiot, I don't want to say sheeple because it's like so cliche, but like these idiot people like that just turn off their heads and not think about anything. So I don't know, like I was just going to say, like, it is definitely very bleak and I can't understand.
Yeah.
Like it is, that's so terrible. And,
it's interesting. I'm really starting to realize that we don't have rights over here, and the law is not on our side.
Yeah.
I mean, you in America have the Second Amendment, you have the Constitution, you have the Federalist Papers, and these were all men who feared God and who put pen to paper with that authority and that ultimate authority in mind. And in Australia, we don't have our laws and our, I guess, nation built on the same type of logic as that. We have very much lauded government as, put government as God. Like it's like what God says in the Bible, render things to Caesar that belong to Caesar and render things to God that belong to God. It's like the Americans at least got that right, that they've recognized that people's freedoms and their rights aren't Caesar's to own, they're God's, and you inherited them when you're born. In Australia, it's like we've said that the government is Lord. The government, and therefore we've sort of handed to Caesar these things, and based on that, Caesar has then written the rules of the land, as opposed to, I guess, government being in check with the ultimate authority of God. And that's sort of the difference, I think, over here. And we have these public health acts, which is enacted law, which is where they're able to, do these emergency powers and mandates. The one in Western Australia, which is one of our states, was made in 1956. And in that legislation, it says in there, and I wrote an article on this for Caldron Pool, that it actually stipulated word for word that an authorised officer, which can be a public servant, aka a police officer, are able to enter a home without a warrant. They're able to physically restrain a person, remove clothing and underwear, and vaccinate. This is in legislation. If you go on caldronpool.com, look at Evelyn Rae, look at Western Australia, I wrote an article on it. That's enacted legislation. And this can be done without a warrant at the direction of a CHO, which is a Chief Health Officer.
Wow.
So, as you said, everything is here to be used. We are literally at the mercy of the discretion of our corrupt government. And it's like, which government is going to do this and which isn't? And we just have to have faith and hope that the governments don't do that. But if they want to, they have all the powers here to do that, and we're unarmed. This is what we're faced with. And it hasn't happened as of yet, but you can see how it can happen. And legally, according to our legal system, it can happen.
Yeah. Do you see a lot of hypocrisy with the leaders as well? Like they enact mandates and laws and rules, and then they get caught breaking them. Do you see that happening a lot?
Yeah, we have seen it. So they've basically made vaccination mandatory for most employment. If you want to have a job, you basically have to be vaccinated unless you work for yourself or a small business that might just not get involved. But the federal government, not the state government, but Scott Morrison, our Prime Minister, said we're not going to mandate vaccines. We don't agree with that. Yeah. And he won't make vaccinations mandatory for members of Parliament, these politicians, because that goes against the Constitution, apparently. but these states can mandate it to us. This is why we're all going. This is like how unbelievable this is.
Yeah.
In terms of the hypocrisy and just why it's okay for one and not the other, and that's why we are in a two-tiered society in many ways. And there, unfortunately, those of us middle class, hard-working Aussies, we kind of got the short stick here.
Yeah, yeah. You were talking about just the Lord and just God-given rights and all of that. What's the spiritual climate right now with, like, in the churches? Those that are churches still closed down this far along in the pandemic? Are they opening? Are they defying? Are they trying to, like, what's the sort of the spiritual climate within the churches?
Yeah, it's something I've been quite disappointed in, if I'm honest, because up until about 3 weeks ago, churches were closed. Churches have been closed. And up until 3 weeks ago, only vaccinated were allowed to attend, not unvaccinated. So I was an uncircumcised heathen for a while there. It's only been the last 3 weeks that I'm allowed to go back to church being unvaccinated, because they amended our public health orders to say that was an essential service. But before that, it wasn't deemed an essential service. So since March 2020, I've been in and out of church when the government say I can and can't. There are some really amazing godly men over here in Australia who are ministers of churches who wrote the Ezekiel Declaration and the Moses Statement, and a few things basically as church leaders saying we don't agree with discriminating based on vaccine status, and how theologically and biblically that would obviously be wrong. Sadly, those ministers who wrote that to say we can't discriminate in our church, they got criticised by other ministers in Australia.
It's crazy.
For being selfish. And I'm sure you guys are seeing it in America. There are ministers coming out basically, the vaccination is the new Messiah. And it's really sad. And we've seen a little bit of that here in Australia. There's, as I said, an amazing group of ministers who wrote those declarations. You can read them on Caldron Pool if you like, Ezekiel Declaration. It's worth a read because it's something that you guys can take to your ministers in America and worldwide, because it's so relevant. It's just theological understanding on who you can segregate and not segregate into church, and the proper interpretation of Romans 13. I think this has shown how poor people's theology is, the pandemic. People like to just throw out Romans 13 without understanding it properly. But, church has been a bit all over the place.
And for us here in the States, like when it first started happening in California in particular, they were really strong. California and New York were the two big states that were really hammering down on people. And one of our big pastors out here in California, his name was John MacArthur. He just refused to comply, and he basically, he's an old guy. He's kind of grizzly, and he just said, "We're not."
I know MacArthur.
Yeah, I love him. I love his preaching, but he said we're not going to do it, and he got a lot of slack. And I heard Christians that I respect criticizing him, saying that he's not demonstrating love for his neighbor. He's not, the Romans 13, he's not, respecting the law of the land, that was handed down, or those that are in authority that God's placed. And it took a while, and I thought I was going to see a bigger fissure happen of separation between these churches that were what I consider progressive versus the conservative churches that are more orthodox and hold to more biblical standards, actually teach the Bible. But the thing that surprised me the most, I don't know if you noticed this, was the fear that got a hold of so many believers. And it basically showed me that what they're consuming, they're probably just like on a steady diet of mainstream news and not challenging what's going into their mind or what they're being told with any other data. And it just stokes fear. And it's so frustrating because as believers, there's never been a time in history that was more dangerous for Christians than the early church, when they first, the first, probably 70 years of the church existence, because they were being chased, persecuted, but they never stopped meeting. Yeah. They always, they kept meeting, they kept sharing the gospel. And then when I saw sort of like the buckling of like a lawn chair for so many churches, like there was a friend of mine's church, they didn't meet for like 6 months. And that was it. And I thought, wow, I don't know how they're even going to open their doors back up. They're not going to know what to do when people come back into their sanctuary. They're going to be afraid of them, But
Yeah.
it's just a sad state. And I think you're right. I think for many believers, this has placed them in a position where they have to really dig in and just like, what do I believe? Who am I trusting in? And who ultimately holds my future,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I really do think it's kind of sorting the wheat from the chaff right now. I think the time for the mediocre Christian is over. Satan owns the fence. And too many Christians have been sitting on that fence for too long. And, just like, I think this is a great leveling. And just like when God speaks, and when you can see him in the Old Testament, when he spoke to Moses on the mountain shook like an earthquake. And I think right now he's speaking. I fully believe the West, we are nations under his judgment. We've been killing babies in the womb.
Yes.
And we've been cutting off private parts of children in the name of tolerance. We've been euthanizing people under the guise of good death. All this nonsense for so long. And God's speaking and he's shaking and we're leveling. And it's teaching us to hold on to things that are eternal, things that are solid, and to let go of these false supports and these false ideas that are going to fall off as he speaks and as he shakes. And I think, it's been sad watching churches respond, but my goodness, am I grateful for it that I'm not under the headship or leadership of ministers who are not, holding on to these eternal things. I'm so grateful that, the wolves are being exposed and, the new era of shepherds and these, I feel like, and I don't know if you're the same in America, but ministers have become like a career instead of a calling. And it's like the big Eva, the big evangelical, big tech, big Eva. And, I feel like for so long, Bible colleges and theological degrees have become academic things, and we've lost that God-given spiritual calling to the fight and to that role. And maybe this is the moment where God speaks, where he's shaking, where things are trembling, we're leveling, and this new era of shepherds who are actually called. And I'm seeing that there are so many men over here who are saying, I'm going to start a new church, one that actually is built on the Bible, who watches the news in one hand and the Bible in the other. And that's how we lead our congregation. And, as I said, it's sad, but I'm grateful for it because, as John Calvin said, if God wants to judge a nation, he gives them bad leaders.
Yeah.
And, it goes for the church and it goes for our government. And, maybe this is going to breed new leaders that are going to lead us out of this tyranny and out of this corrosive rot of a culture that we're breeding in the West.
Well, that is hopeful. I'm glad to hear that the Lord's raising up men to really be bold and do it the right way. And, what's funny is if you take away the income, you'll really find out who's got a calling on their life because they're the ones that'll stick around and care for the people and teach them and disciple and share.
Yeah.
Those that are just in it for the money, they'll leave and find another job, another career, That's a good separator. I always like to ask, I kind of judge. I was in ministry full-time vocationally for a long time, many years, 16 years. And so I got to see.
And he left when the money ran out.
No. I got fired. That's the truth. I did get fired, but not for anything immoral. It was, I didn't agree with the leadership with a direction they went that was unbiblical. So, and then they never enacted it. So
there you go.
I stood my ground and then got let go, and then they didn't do it, which was great. So I feel like I had a small victory there, but being in a large church, we had probably 12 pastors full time vocationally, and in that church, it was a big congregation and a great church. I don't want to speak ill of them in any way. Great church, teach the Bible, people are getting saved, lots of great lives are being changed. Great impact in our community. So I have a lot of great things to say about it. But I often wondered in that room, in those pastors' meeting, who would be there if suddenly the money was gone and they weren't going to get the paycheck. Who would stay? Who would serve the people? Who would find a way to do it? Now, I get it. You got a family. You got to feed your family. And, but there's a lot of great pastors out there that will be virtually unknown who work full-time jobs and then have a church, and they also pastor a church, and they'll never be known by us, but the Lord knows, and he'll honor them, on that day.
Yeah.
So, but man, wow. Well, I tell you what, how can our listeners help Australia? I obviously praying for you guys, but what can be done? What can we do?
Large drones with AR-15s
Those
attached.
care packages sound pretty good.
All right.
What about green cards? If there's single men and single ladies over there who want to have arranged marriages like the Puritans or something and get us over the border. No, but...
I'm single, ladies. All the single Australian ladies.
You only need one, Rosie.
Only need one.
But, I have some lovely, lovely friends from church that I might be able to... anyway, this is it. Off the podcast. But no, look, honestly, to be honest, just talking about us and not forgetting about us down here. As we've mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, Austria and Germany are kind of doing, going down the path that we've been going down for such a long time. So if people just don't forget about us, because we still are living, it's not over. We're still locked in our homes.
Yeah.
So if people can just really keep us in your prayers and keep circulating what's going on in the news, like go onto Caldron Pool and share the articles and other, I'm not just saying mine, but other news sources, and get the truth out there, because it'll not only act as spreading the truth, but it will help you guys out with the journey, because you can see the warning signs and the red flags from us. So, that's a great way to support. There is a section on cauldronpool.com if people do want to support us that way. We kind of do it for the love of it. We're all kind of do that, but, just letting us have a voice in the world outside of Australia is so crucial. And I thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, we will definitely pray, and I'll be praying for you guys and for you in particular too. But and we'll be praying for a wife for Rosie to come from down under. So, but also too, we'll put all of the links to Caldron Pool and everything in the show notes on the podcast for sure. How can people find you? Like, other than Caldron Pool, is that okay? Twitter? Is there anything like? Do you have any other places that you're social media or anything like that?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram and Facebook, and I'm on Gab and Telegram. Okay. I'm on kind of all of them. My most active, I would say, on Twitter. Yeah. And Instagram. I've been shadow banned pretty much everywhere else. But yeah, you can find me there. And I usually, like, if I'm doing something, like, I'll share it on those particular platforms. People can follow that way. So
cool. Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah, and we will put all of the links in our show notes for people to connect with you. And Evelyn, I tell you what, it's been good to hear, from someone who's living in this situation, what's happening, and to really help people understand. I hope that people see this, and between you and me, I think our current president would love to have what's going on in Australia happening here. I think that's his wet dream.
I think so.
He would be so excited if he could make that happen. But we have those drone drops, so he can't do that. So
yeah, absolutely.
But so we'll put all that stuff in the show notes, and I want to encourage our listeners to just think of our Australian friends and pray for them. And the final thing is that I love that verse, the one who the Lord sets free is free indeed, and it has to start with Jesus. And so we need to pray for revival in Australia, for the hearts of the people to turn to the Lord and call out to Him. And then maybe that judgment will be lifted, and maybe they'll see things turn around in a radical way that even that they might not even ever expect, you know.
Yeah, we are ripe for a revival.
Yeah, it is. So, well, Evelyn, thank you so much. Rosie, you got anything you want to ask? Or
Amen.
Just throwing out an amen. Yeah. But thank you so much, Evelyn, for joining us and for, sharing your story and everything that's going on there. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate you guys so much, and you're doing great things. So thank you.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. So we will. I'll keep connected with you on Twitter, and we'll let you know when this is airing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks again. I really appreciate it. And I'm speaking at a rally on the 27th.
Okay.
I'm in Sydney, and I'm going to be breaking the law to do it because I'm unvaccinated. So the next time you see me or hear from me, I might be in handcuffs. Who knows?
Oh, man.
We'll see.
All right. So we're praying for the 27th. That's
yeah, we'll see how that goes.
All right. Well,
I just decided I'm just going to do it. I was asked, and I was like, I'm going to do it. I'm the only one over here in Australia who's a Christian voice in the fight. Like, I'm not the only Christian in the fight, but who's got a platform and who was asked. Everybody else is secular or agnostic or atheist. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go on this stage at Sydney Parliament with this mic, and I'm going to just talk about the only way to save the West is through Christ. And I'm just going to do it. Yeah. So if I get arrested, then bad luck.
Yeah.
That's going to happen.
That's awesome.
So we'll see.
Who knows?
So I'm going to do it, guys.
Yeah, do it. Do it. Preach boldly, because you never know whose life would be changed from that. You just never know.
I don't like preaching. I'm a bit of a John MacArthur with that. Women don't belong in the pulpit. But this isn't the pulpit, so I'll talk.
That's right.
I'll talk.
Well, we all have a testimony, right? We all have something to share about the Lord. That's good. Yeah. Well, we'll be awesome. I'll be looking forward to hearing about that. Okay.
Yeah. All right. Thanks so much. You take care. I'll be in touch.
Thank you. Sure. Thank you so much, Evan. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay. See you guys. Bye.
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 Thanks for listening to the All Out War podcast today. If you had a blast, then we'd love to have you back for another episode. So please subscribe and leave a review. We love to hear from you. You can also follow us on Instagram at All Out War Podcast or on Twitter at AOWcast. These episodes are also available on YouTube unless they contain a little too much truth. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.